There we are. We are now live officially, and we have Yvette Gonzalez all the way in Berlin. So,
Hi.
Yvette, welcome, and thank you so much
Thank you.
for making the time to chat with us. We want to go
Yes.
all the way back to the beginning. You're not from Berlin. You're
No.
actually originally from Texas.
Yes, I am. Yeah. And my
So,
family's still there.
okay. So, what did you study at school that started to lead you on this path of where you landed up?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to contribute. I definitely started with a career in international work. I knew I wanted to do something that worked globally. So my undergrad work was a bachelor's in multinational organization studies in French. So I wanted to have a skill set to work anywhere in the world. And then I was going to define what that would be eventually. And then I have a master's in public health, focusing on epidemiology, so kind of scientific work, and also focused on forced migration. So anywhere in the world, there was a community that was forced to migrate because of war, conflict, post-conflict, natural disaster, and even epidemiological outbreak like Ebola. I wanted to be part of systems and teams that would help to work with communities to rebuild in those situations.
So, did you ever travel to any places where people were forced to migrate? And did you ever go to
Many.
places where they had Ebola and those sorts of things?
Yes. So I've worked in over 42 countries, and Afghanistan, Somalia, Mali, more recently Uganda, Sierra Leone, that was Ebola related, Benin. And I've spent a good part of the last 17, 18 years focused on Africa, mostly because I'm Francophone.
Hmm.
So it's very rare to get an American who's Francophone. There are some of us, but for the humanitarian work, it's very sought after to have somebody who's a French speaker to work in these countries. So yeah, a lot of countries that have been post-disaster. Haiti, I spent at least 6 years after the earthquake there. Nepal after the
Hmm.
earthquake there. So yeah, I've been in a lot of these contexts.
And when you go to those places, what is it that you actually do?
So first and foremost, it's building trust. I go not to impose any ideas on them of what I think they need. I go to relay to a community, first find out and evaluate what is it that you need. Do you even want my help? Do you need anyone's assistance? And if you do, what is it? Uh, Typically, I arrive and I go to communities and I listen to their needs. I do an evaluation of what it is they're experiencing, what has changed for them, where were they before the incident and where are they now, and what is it that they need to revitalize or stabilize their situation. And most often it's kind of vital needs on Maslow's hierarchy. It's food, water, shelter, these kind of the first ring of things that you would expect from all human
Hmm.
beings to need. And it's also sanitation, and then safety and security. And then it goes on, and kind of the layers after that include education, jobs, economic revitalization. But typically, it's I go in and I talk to people, I build their trust. There are communities that are very difficult to kind of penetrate. But what I'm trying to do in these situations is learn what are the common human factors. What is the common denominator amongst all these communities? And once I understand that, how is it that they want to stabilize? What makes them feel safe? How are they going to rebuild? And then I translate that into proposals to donors, government, private, and I get funding for them to get these programs started that will give them what they have asked for.
Now, you said you go in, but are you representing anyone, or is it just you? You come and arrive. Hi, I'm Yvette. I'm a multitasker, and I would love to assist you. How can I get involved? Or are you there to represent an organization?
So I am hired as a consultant.
Hmm.
So I have my own business where I'm hired, but I would go in normally with an organization. So I can go in with a non-governmental organization, an NGO, and that can be a local one who found my name from somebody who knew somebody, or it can be with an American-based, French-based, Spanish-based, international organization that knows me from all the years of work, and will hire me for like 15 to 30 days. And then I can also go in with the US government if they hire me, which I did many years ago, or the UN, so United Nations could hire me. So once a group comes to me, and typically it is a NGO, more often than not, or private sector group. And when they find my name, or they find me on LinkedIn, or they have somebody that shared my information, or they find me on Twitter, or they, there's so many different means of finding me or knowing my work.
Mm-hmm.
They ask me, do you have time? Are you willing to go to this location? And here's what we would like from you. And they'll give me a list. We want you to write a proposal. We want you to get access to a community. We want you to get money for a program. We want you to stay with the community for 15 days and just tell us what they need. And if I say yes, they will pay for me to go, and then I execute everything that they've asked for.
Wow. And how easy is it to get money? Because nowadays
Ooh.
it's becoming more scarce than ever before.
Yeah, that has always been difficult. And so the whole basis of what I do has been very high competition. A lot of groups go in and compete for this money. A lot of individuals are writing proposals. It is harder now than it's ever been because many reasons. One, politically, there's very scarce availability of money from
Mm-hmm.
different organizations. Two, there's been a decrease in the last decade or two of security and safety around humanitarian work. We used to have these child days where, at least on vaccination days or the Children's Day, all conflict ceased, or anything that was adherently a threat
Mm-hmm.
was deemed inactive for one day while we access children. And those days are gone. There aren't those safe days anymore. These are targeted days. So it's been really hard to convince donors that you will invest in a program that will help people, and we will show results, and the community will thrive when there's still imminent danger and less and less money. There's a lot of justifying and being accountable. You have to really think about, at the end, we're dealing with human beings who are just human in contexts that are often misunderstood
Mm-hmm.
because the news inflates it, or we don't have enough information. And then there's the priority of, is malaria more important, or is HIV more important, or is Ebola more important? These are the kind of things at play that you can't control.
Mm-hmm. So,
So,
but now, I mean, are there times where you've been asked to go into areas that your safety is compromised?
oh yeah. I mean, but it was at the end of your choice. You're never forced to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So a big question from every single contractor that I've engaged with has been, are you aware of the imminent danger? Are you aware of the security situation? Are you aware and informed? Often, and I would say 9 out of 10 times or more, if they have a security team in the place that we're going, Afghanistan, Somalia, to the most that I can be informed, I agree to go when I think that I can be safe enough to conduct my work. Recently, I was offered to go to Afghanistan to do a 30-day contract, work that I would have loved to have done, but I did not feel compelled that the security situation was in my favor. And I didn't think at this time that they asked me the period of time it was the most active attacks, that it was safe for me to conduct any of my work and to be productive.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Wow, so
turned
you've
that
got
one
some
down.
tough decisions to make, and obviously you're very fortunate that you can turn down business, but of course you only have one life, so it's not something that you want to take
Exactly.
a chance with. So
It's not
now
like, no.
you're obviously working with communities in need, but then there's a space connection. What is the space connection?
Ah, well, 2 years ago, I started to question, what is it that I want to do? Because I feel like, for almost 20 years, I've dedicated myself to communities that have been kind of socially deconstructed. And then rebuilt in new environments. And what is it that we see as human resilience, and how do we apply that to a bigger cause, and what can I do with that information? So I wanted to transition to something bigger, a different career. Now, at the time, I had many options, and I thought, should I go to military? Should I do something civil military related? Or should I stay in development and find my own niche and create some other kind of journey and path with this? And I was definitely reaching out to contacts through LinkedIn. I made it kind of a my mission to ask all my friends who I thought had my dream jobs or were doing really well in their jobs, what is it that made them happy? Did they feel fulfilled with what they were doing? And if they had a chance to do something bigger, what would it be? Through a series of asking questions and asking people on LinkedIn who I didn't know but had the job title, dream job I thought I wanted, I started to realize I wanted to be involved in tech and in space. So a friend of mine had been part of a team that developed a 3D printer that went to space. She invited me for a week of working with her and meeting her contacts. And then I realized there's room for me in the space sector to contribute. There's room for me to work in a new industry. So I just had to develop my path, and I had to decide, do I need to continue going to school? Because I knew I wanted to be involved. There was so much happening, and I knew this 2 years ago. I was like, okay, there's so many things happening at lightning speed. So many different sectors are now contributing to space. How can I? I have to have some kind of skill that applies. And this friend of mine introduced me to a program where you can be a scientist and you can actually train as a scientist astronaut, which is what I started to do 2 years ago. And I realized my human resilience background could then be applied to human behavior space. How do communities of humans adapt to new environments? And I thought, oh, this is what I've done for 20 years. And human factors is what it's called in the space sector.
Mhm.
And it's very up and coming. There's not many people who specialize in it entirely. And a lot of engineering companies need human factors to say, if we're building a capsule for longevity and long-term spaceflight, how does a human interact in it? What is that experience? When we get to Mars and we have a habitat, or we live on the moon, what is the human experience? What should we already know that's predictable? What can we learn on Earth about human behavior before we go? And I thought, okay, these are the things that I have seen for 20 years.
Mhm.
This is how I can contribute.
Wow. So, I mean, were you always interested in space, or
Oh,
was it just
yeah.
so you were always a big fan of space, but you never had a way to tie everything together?
No, and I'm from the child of the 70s, and I was born the year the Voyagers were sent out into space. So I grew up discovering space and the photos of space as they were actually coming live, right?
Hmm.
And then my father was in the military, and then he did contracts for NASA. But he would take us as children up to the mountains to look. I grew up in Texas in the mountains, and we would look at the stars at night. And I was lucky and fortunate enough to be in a dark enough area that you could see shooting stars and you could dream and we could talk about life. And my father was really a believer that if we dreamt it, it could happen. If you think that something is impossible and you want to figure out if it's possible, then pursue it. He put no limitations on us, and then he had his experience, so he believed what NASA was doing was actually worthwhile. So I already knew I was intrigued by the stars and I wanted that. But I know that when I was in junior to high school, that I didn't want to be a fighter pilot. And at the time, I was truly informed, and I thought I was informed as a 12-year-old girl that I'm like, oh, I don't want to be a fighter pilot, and I have to be a fighter pilot to be an astronaut. Maybe I'll do something else that will contribute to humanity. And so that started my path to humanitarian work. But I took extra classes in undergrad that had nothing to do with my degree, that were
Uh-huh.
astronomy. And I remember always thinking, God, these are really my favorite classes, but this is probably not going to be my career. I'm going to pursue other ways to help humanity, and that's so it kind of became my hobby on the side, and that dream of, oh, I wish someday. But it was originally that I don't want to be in the military as a pilot. I want to be out with the people, and that was the differentiator for me and why I kind of veered to my development path.
So then, as a scientist astronaut candidate, what does it actually mean?
So right now, the program that I'm doing is with the International Institute for Astronautical Science, based out of Colorado. Anyone can apply. Minimally, you would have a STEM background and have scuba diving certification to take place, to get your first place and start programming.
Mm-hmm.
And it's classes that are offered on an annual basis to train a group of people, scientists, who eventually will go to suborbit and study noctilucent clouds, which are ice clouds. So the gentleman who started this, the director, trains us on different courses throughout the year. They're offered annually, so you pay and you attend classes as you have time and as you have money to pay for them. And somebody
Mm-hmm.
else can fund them, or you can self-fund them. And this program, because he has people with STEM backgrounds, you become a scientist astronaut candidate, because if we go with him to suborbit, you are a scientist conducting research on ice clouds. Now, this is one way to get trained, but this is one of many ways
Mm-hmm.
that are coming open. So they call you scientist astronaut candidate because you're doing scientific research and you're actually training to be an astronaut to go to suborbit.
So that is pretty cool. So
Yeah, it
now,
is.
I mean, you're obviously focusing on things like the resilience. I mean, if you ever want to learn about resilience, just go watch a kindergarten teacher for a year, and you'll know what resilience is all about.
Exactly.
Uh,
There's so much a range. There's like such a range of resilience.
but I also noticed that you're involved with analog communities.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about analog communities and why they're so important?
Yeah, I think so. An analog, for those who don't know, is a simulation of living in a habitat or having an experience of a simulation of Mars or the moon. And an analog can be of any other environment that's not of your own. But in terms of space, there's two types of analogs being conducted: Mars analogs, which have been done for many years, and now there's lunar analogs, where they build a habitat. They being, it can be private, it can be NASA, it can be the European Space Agency, many different groups. The Mars Society, as long as they have money and a location, they choose places on Earth, typically volcanic or desert, that simulate the same environment as either the moon or Mars on Earth. So very extreme environments. That way you can be in a closed environment, living with a small number of people. It can be 6 people, 5 people. They choose you. You go through a process of interviews, evaluation, and you live together for either 14 days. Some of them are up to 1 year. One of the
Wow.
NASA simulations was 1 year. Yeah. And the reason you're in an environment that's extreme or similar to Mars or the moon is because you have to simulate doing EVAs, extravehicular activities, which you put on the pressurized spacesuit, you go outside and you simulate doing research and collection of soil samples on the moon or on Mars. And you have to simulate and exercise that to say, what would it be like to be in a closed environment, away from radiation, in an oxygen environment, in a safe breathing environment, with people, the same people, day in and day out for a long period of time? Psychologically, what do we need? Physiologically, what do we need? Intellectually, what do we need? What are all the characteristics of that environment that will create a resilient, thriving, sustainable situation where we're productive? And what are those? How do we choose people for that?
Well,
Who are going to be yeah, go ahead.
let me play devil's advocate. Okay, so
Sure.
you want to create an analog community that resembles Mars.
Mm-hmm.
Does it really matter what it looks like outside? Because you could easily create that with graphics and a set if you really wanted to simulate
Sure.
a similar environment. But of course, gravity on the moon is different to gravity on Earth. So really, what you're doing is just putting people in a living environment that has something that resembles the moon or Mars on the outside, but you really want to see how they're going to live within that environment. So does it matter if you're putting them in extreme places or not?
I don't think it does. It helps because the EVAs are fun and give people a chance to actually exercise the action of going outside and the action of being in a lava environment, which is very similar. No, there's one even with NASA, the Hera simulation that's all indoor in Texas, and the outside environment doesn't matter. It's about the inside environment, and that tests something very different. So these analogs can be in any scenario. It just depends on what you're researching. Are you researching human behavior? Are you researching the scientific aspect, and how do people actually go out and collect soil samples, the geologic? Yeah, it would depend on what you, but I don't think that that's impossible. I think even a virtual reality analog is possible in the future or
And
now.
from your experience, what have you seen from these particular analog environments? What do you think the learnings have been so far?
So for what I know, and I've been trained with the Austrian Space Forum and with the Euromoon Mars team from ESA, from the European Space Agency.
Hmm.
So these are the two that work in quite different environments. So the Austrian Space Forum does their analog for Mars only. They're only testing for Mars, and every year they're doing their candidate selection, and they have a different location on Earth. So last 2018 was Oman. Next year it will be in Israel. So they're constantly doing negotiations with different organizations and different governments to find different environments on Earth to test. With that one, what we're learning is that science is very important. And so there's a lot of contributions around the world giving scientific contribution to both the human experience, but also into botany, like how do we grow plants and how do we grow food in these different environments, and how do we build habitats. One thing that's really important is architecture. Do we live in one dome altogether, and is that going to suffice? Or should it be spaced out bubbles where there's a separate living room and there's a separate laboratory and there's a separate bedroom and there's a separate exercise area to psychologically improve the chances of people being balanced together for long periods of time, because it's very important. And privacy is important, and interaction and community is very important. The ones in high seas in Hawaii that were with NASA and then recently now commercialized in private, that's where there's a lunar analog. It's much more about the human interaction and bringing an engineer and a scientist and what's the skill set mix that we need. A lot of these are also teaching us what kind of gender mix do we need? What kind of age mix do we need? What kind of skill sets do we need? When we have the first group of astronauts to go to the moon or to Mars, as a team for long duration, what gender balance do we need? How many people do we need? What's been proven to be the magic number? What's the gender balance? And then what is the skill set? What is determined to be? I mean, I would like to know that there's going to be a medical personnel with us for sure. I would be very happy to know that we have a flight commander who knows how to pilot, and all of us know how to pilot. But also a medical expert, a doctor would be, for me, crucial. And then maybe somebody who's an agronomist or a botanist who can grow food and understands nutrition. So, these are the things that we're figuring out.
So, would you go and do an analog for a year living with a group of people?
I would do one, yeah, and I want to.
So, how do you get selected to do something like that?
Well, they're all different. You apply to all of them. So like MDRS, which is the Mars Desert Research Station, that's Mars Society. You apply through a long process. You tell them whether you're available for 14 days, 20 days, and they put teams together by skill set. And then you spend your time once you're selected. So I think the applications now are for next year. High Seas, the lunar analog with Euromoon Mars. That's a selection process as well, with Bernard Foing and the team that I work with. And they take into consideration your skill set and if you would be willing to help with science and publish the science afterwards. So all of them have an application process. Some are harder to get into than others, more competitive. NASA, the HERA analog, is so competitive. And then a lot of them also are dependent on your citizenship. So the Austrian Space Forum, for example, as an American, I can't be an analog astronaut in the analog, but I can serve on the mission control and I can work with the team in Innsbruck and I can actually help manage day-to-day flight plans, or I can take a role in the medical team. So there's ways to participate in different ones depending on your nationality and then on your skill set.
What is your feeling about going to Mars? When do you think it's going to happen? And do you think that it's more challenging than they're making it out to be, or do you think it's way more simple than we previously thought?
So I'm an optimist, right? So I want it to happen. but wanting and making things a reality are so vastly different. So, like many, I believe that so many things are possible, and I hope in my lifetime I see this. I think it's a longer preparation time. I don't think 2033 is going to happen. And I think I read something recently that 2033 is not feasible anymore. It's going to be further pushed out because 2033 was the date given that that would be the first missions to Mars. That was
Uh-huh.
possible, feasible with SpaceX and and other groups that are working towards Mars. Um, I want it to happen because I do believe that space exploration is a worthy cause, both for the expansion of our knowledge, but then for any application that can be given to Earth and to be used on Earth to improve our life, I think is worth it. The things that we're going to learn from it, I hope, will make life better here,
Mhm.
or will prove to make a life, future life that we can't even imagine exists yet. I hope that those are the things that come to fruition, or that science there, the research that we conduct, somehow creates revelations for what we're doing on Earth. These are the hopes I have. Yeah.
But now you are convinced that maybe the commercial sector is going to play a much larger role than people actually. Uh, so people have this impression that everything's driven by government, but
Mm-hmm.
the commercial sector, I have a sneaky suspicion that you feel the commercial sector is going to play a much larger role. Would it be safe to assume that?
It already is, yeah. And so last year, I decided in my transition to space sector, wanting to go full time in the space sector, to take the first year and a half to start my training. And then I personally planned, I want to attend every conference that I am capable of going to so that I understand all the various industries involved in all the stories in all the perspectives that I can in the first year. So I went to about 12 conferences last year, mostly back to back, and just learning about planetary science, astrobiology, the astronautical conference that they have every year, Human to Mars conference, and looking at the different audiences. And the common denominator I found in every conference is that commercial sector is alive and well. It's gaining more momentum, and the role that government is giving it is very, very crucial and important. Uh, the administrator for NASA stated at the large conference last year in Germany that the future of spaceflight depends on a coexistence and a coordination between commercial and government. Because whatever government cannot do because they cannot do fast enough, commercial sector will be invited to help with that. And I think that's
Well, I
exactly
mean,
the balance we have. Yeah.
Elon Musk is breaking down walls and boundaries. He's getting rockets to
Yes.
launch and then land on separate pads. I mean, just to be able to see that
Yes.
in our
It's
lifetime,
magic. Yes.
that is just
Yes.
insane.
Oh, and I went to last year to the Falcon Heavy launch, the first with the spaceman
Uh-huh.
and the Tesla. And I happened to be in Florida and went to see it live. And I have to say, there's these moments of utter and sheer magic that can't be expressed except for that feeling you have of that tingly, life altering, this is changing everything moment. And there's been a lot of those recently. They did
Mhm.
it again. And yeah, it's a pretty brilliant and spectacular thing to see somebody's grit and drive and just his ability to say, I can do it. If we can't, let's figure it out. And to know that there's someone out there who is teaching us that you learn so much from failure and that failure helps us to grow. And that's exactly what now I think is inspiring a lot of people in the field is that, okay, you know
But
what? Somebody told me I can't. I'll
mhm.
try.
But now Elon Musk is not the only one. There are quite a few
No.
companies that are jumping on the bandwagon. And just recently, Virgin Galactic launched their first commercial space flight. They had a couple of their staff taking that flight. They went suborbital,
Yeah.
floated around for a couple of minutes. Are you anticipating being one of those commercial customers?
Yes, and actually, there's a few opportunities now that have gone live in the last few months, where there are competitions that are open to candidates. A lot of competitions. Some of them are paid for privately. Some of them to be a commercial astronaut or a career astronaut. Went live to either compete by credibility and through evaluations and interviews. There's some contests that opened up and competitions that all of them have minimum requirements. Some of them are, you have to have a STEM degree, you have to have scuba, you have to have a pilot's license, you have a certain number of trainings already done and conducted. There's a lot of things that are already as a template for everybody that should be going up. The reality with a lot of these, however, I would say from what I've seen, 99% of them they are not funded. So you have to be willing to do crowdfunding and raise the money over the next few years while you negotiate opportunity with Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, or any of the others that might appear that haven't appeared yet to be really strong contenders. The thing about the commercial competition is that it's rather self-selective, I have to say, because you have to be aware of what you're plugging into. You have to be conscious of safety, security, and that your ability to contribute is bigger than just, oh, I want to go. It's, I want to go, but I want to go safely. And I want to go with a team that I can work with and rely on. And that's definitely what's important to a lot of these selection committees.
But now you're obviously working with a lot of organizations. One that jumped up or came to mind was the Possum, Project Possum. What
Yeah.
is that all about?
So Project Possum is actually where I'm getting my applied astronautics program. So many years ago, and I will say 8 years ago, but don't quote me, on our website, you'll see Dr. Jason Reimuller had an opportunity to study noctilucent clouds, these ice clouds in the polar caps. And it was basically if he would build a team of astronaut trained scientists, then he would get a suborbit opportunity to fly them to do these studies. While the suborbit opportunity has gone away a few years ago, he's still training a cohort, and many cohorts actually every year. There's about, I would say, 20 to 24 new students every year because they do an introductory class twice a year. And over the last 7.5 years, where you come in and you start to get introduced to the science, you get introduced to how you train as an astronaut. And then you get very serious into Orion capsule training, into survival egressing underwater. You're doing microgravity campaigns. And so every course is accredited, and you're working towards a certification and to be approved to be on his team. So Possum is polar, it stands for, polar suborbital science in the upper mesosphere. Possum.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the acronym. Actually, Possum is the acronym. And this set of programs is ongoing, and people join for many reasons. Some people want to just jumpstart their astronaut career. Some people are scientists and just love the opportunity to do microgravity campaigns every year. There are a lot of people who are involved who are fantastic fighter pilots or flight surgeons who are getting practical knowledge because they do want to go up, but they have full-time jobs. They're in the military or they work at hospitals. So it's a training ground for people who are willing to do scientific research in suborbit and who can use this as a launching pad for further training to be longer term duration astronauts or ISS eventually.
Okay, but now when it comes to the work that you're doing, a little birdie on my shoulder tells me that you're quite serious about being a positive role model, especially for women and
Yes.
people from underserved communities. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and actually it's funny that, the growing number of people in the industry look at diversity, right? And how do we influence and encourage or inspire the next generation and not discourage them, not squash their dreams? And how do we help them flourish? Because there's so much opportunity. So Possum created Possum 13, which is inspired by the Mercury 13. a group of fighter pilot or pilots, women who were trained along the NASA protocols and who inspired us to believe that women can be capable of competing and going to space. So the 13 of us serve as ambassadors for our different countries that we come from, our different backgrounds. And what we do is we do education. We serve to do outreach. And this first year that we just started up, we have a microgravity challenge where we're allowing 3 spots for student groups that involve young girls to create a scientific experiment that we can take up to, with us on these microgravity flights in Canada. But one lucky student will win overall and get to go with us. So we're trying to explore ways that we can involve young girls in STEM, give an opportunity that was only a dream to us when we were younger, and then share our knowledge to let them know space is accessible. Being an astronaut candidate is in reach. It is possible, and it's possible that if this is your dream, you can pursue it. And that there's many, many ways to contribute on Earth while you train to go into space. So that if it takes a decade or two, that you have a valuable contribution in whatever you're doing here that will apply once you go into orbit.
100%. I'm going to come back to some more questions, but I know Tony wants to ask you something. Tony, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Great. Thanks for all this information. Your life sounds very exciting.
Thank you.
What would you say to schools in those diverse areas that have the diversity that, you know, they're not seeing kids going into STEM? What would you say to, or schools or educators?
That's a really good question, actually, because right now what we're doing is we're working with educators and starting to start a conversation for the next year. How do we build in STEM activities into the curriculum and not create extracurricular and extra work? How does STEM become a familiar part of an everyday curriculum and standardized? And how is it that we keep people, young girls, young boys, how do we keep them interested? Because there are studies that show that even if they're interested, by the time they're 12 to 15, they taper out of STEM and they lose their interest because they're not encouraged, there's not role models, there's not programs. So how do we work to make fun activities for STEM, real activities like microgravity challenges or contributions to the sector? How do we create that link for you? And we're going to be starting, you know, this next coming year. It's been such a challenge for us. How do we ensure that we can reach principals, school districts, private schools, and create a dialogue to fit any opportunity we have into the curriculum so that teachers then have an extra added value and they don't have to add work to their workload. It can be part of their curriculum. So it's one way that we think tangibly, functionally, that we can contribute or that we can start, a starting point.
I think that's a fantastic idea if we can. Rayana, would you like to ask a question? We'll find out now. Rayana, if you would like to ask a question, you're welcome to do so. You just need to unmute yourself. If you click on the little microphone, then you can. Let's have a look.
And I'm plugging in just to make sure I don't go off.
No, you're still there.
Yeah. I just saw the low battery. I'm like, how did that happen?
Yeah, we're just trying to get Rayana, if you can just unmute yourself because we can't hear you. So if you click on the little microphone on your screen. No, still not getting any sound?
No, it's still muted.
Okay, all right. So when she works it out, we'll come back to it. I'm fascinated with obviously this journey that we want to get to Mars, and if you look at the space industry from where it was, let's say 40 years ago, and then you move forward a decade, and then another decade, the accomplishments seem to grow at an exponential rate. Rockets are getting bigger, faster, more powerful. They say that it takes on a good month, let's say 7 to 8 months to get to Mars when Mars is closest to Earth. But they say that with new technology, we might be able to get there in a couple of weeks. I mean, can you even imagine that?
I can imagine it. And the thing is, you're talking to somebody who works in all these very extreme environments. I always ask, how do we do that safely? uh, um, I imagine it. There's this hope. I'm so hopeful that in my lifetime this happens, right? And that technology advances so quickly that this is possible. I would hope that if it's safe enough, great. If it's not, let's just stick to the plan. If it has to be slow and steady to get there alive, then it's going to take the 6 to 7 months. Okay, but I have no doubt that we have the human capacity and ability to create a faster way. I've seen some intelligent, and I mean, so smart it scares me, and brilliantly inspires me. People have this way of just creating things that you just thought were impossible 2 decades ago. And you raise a good issue with, there's old space, which is the origins of NASA and the space race and the history. And then there's a new space, which is what we call this era now, which is limitless. The sky is definitely the limit. This is an era of, you have a great idea, make it real, prove it. And definitely it invites artists, engineers, sound engineers, musicians. Everybody's invited to contribute.
Absolutely. Now, Rayhana, you managed to get your sound on. Do you want to ask a question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
I am a primary school teacher here. I teach science, but how can I want to know yourself, and I don't know about yourself at first because I joined here late. So I want to know about yourself.
So can you describe Yvette, give a summary of who you are and what it is that you do?
So thank you for joining us, even if it was late. It's never too late. That's kind of the theme of my life. It's never too late. I am an American citizen, born of a Mexican heritage, Native American heritage, and I spent 20 years as a human resilience expert in humanitarian work. That's what most people understand it as, and working in extreme environments. And I decided 2 years ago to transition to the space sector. So I joined a group, we were talking about Possum, and I am now a certified scientist astronaut candidate. And I am working towards being a commercial candidate. And that means that my interest is to fly in suborbit, cislunar, between the moon and here, it could be the ISS, to conduct research. And eventually I want to contribute to building the moon village. And I want to work on the moon and contribute to a habitat on the moon.
Wow. Okay. So now you've mentioned a couple of things that we hadn't even touched on yet. You said something about flying to the ISS. That's if it's still around, because at some point that program is going to come to an end. But so you're obviously quite keen to become an astronaut, fly to the ISS, and then get very involved with a lunar base.
Yeah, my priority is to be contributing to the moon village, and to lunar work and lunar research. If the ISS is an opportunity, I would love to have that opportunity. The conversations that have taken place recently around the ISS are that we hope it'll be extended for a few more years. And in that time period, the ideas that are floating right now is that hopefully it'll become maybe semi-private, semi-commercial. Will governments then share that space, and how will that work? So I think, when you think about that, it's about accountability. If it goes commercial, private, who's responsible? What are the liabilities? You have to think about all these things in terms of space. The kind of realm, the bubble that surrounds all of my decision making is also that I'm aware of what's space policy, what are space law, what is space security. I'm keeping all of that very, very much on my radar, and I'm very interested in that, because that's very important for how we conduct ourselves, what we build, what we do, and ultimately those are larger existential questions. Who is responsible for creating all that? So yes, I want to go to the moon.
And of
I
course,
want to.
ownership. I mean, if I go to
Oh,
the moon
yeah.
and I happen to pay for my own flight, am I allowed to bring rocks back? Do I share that money with anyone if I sell them? So there's a huge commercial aspect. I've got a funny feeling within the next 5 decades, we could have a bed and breakfast on the moon.
Oh,
And
yeah.
people would be able to fly to the moon, spend a night there, and then come back again.
Yeah, and I see that is a very, very real possibility. Yeah, I mean, when you think about what the opportunities are, and I've seen a lot of information on, do we allow flights to be sponsored by major brands? Do we allow, or are we going to, is it smart to allow marketing to also be a driver? What's our incentive to go? Who who benefits from space? Do we all benefit from space? Do only those who go benefit from space? What is it that we're accountable to in the end? All the communities that I've worked with on Earth, uh, every time a community was disrupted, socially deconstructed, had to move to a new area, location, environment, sure, they had to start over. You had to, okay, where are we going to eat? Where are we going to use the bathroom? Where are we going to sleep? Is there enough water? These basic things that we all need to take care of in order to survive, and at least to have a safe environment. But then it was also, okay, now what's our purpose? What's our new purpose? How do we thrive here? How do we sustain ourselves here? Do we want the next generation to also be here? And what do we set up for our next generation? And all these, what kind of economy are we looking at having? How do we make money on the moon? How do we make money on Mars? Why are we there? All these large questions have not one answer. They have many answers. And you have to understand that you're constantly in this realm, in all these conferences and all the work and with all the different scientists and the engineers, all the different circles that I'm being exposed to and volunteering with and working with have different questions and they have different answers. And I just have to remember to remain open enough to understand all of them, where they're coming from, what their intentions are. And then you really have to understand in the space path, what do you want to be recognized for? What do you want to contribute to? And you have to step back a lot and say, is this right? Is this okay for me in my experience, in my human experience?
Okay, well, let me throw a spanner in the works. You've worked with many communities that have been displaced, that have to migrate because of various factors. Is it not a coincidence that many of these people are leaving because of war, but the roots cause behind the war was financial gain? That often there are many circumstances that have made people move or translocate because of a commercial trigger somewhere along the line. There could be a commercial trigger, and obviously, going to the moon is a great scientific achievement. We've done it before, but it would be great to say we could actually put people on the moon and let them live there for a short while and then do it at Mars because it's a challenge. But someone's going to sit there and go, so how can I make money out of this?
Oh, people are already, how do we make money out of this? There's a whole effort through the European Space Agency. They did a call for proposals from businesses, small businesses, large firms, to tell them we have to create an economy together. There's a market. Are you in? Are you out? How are you going to contribute? Because the lunar economy is real. It's not established yet. Where all these groups are establishing it. It's quite interesting to see a market being developed, and kind of we have a lead time on it. But how do we create a lunar economy? What is that going to look like? What is it based on? For me, in my experience, I look at the maritime industry, the ships, and it was largely influenced by the insurance companies. Is that going to be the same for space travel? Will that lead us into our policies and our regulations? I mean, that was very much what maritime was guided by. Excuse me. But when we look at the moon, And Mars, we look at it. For me, and this is public information that's available, is that there's definitely an oxygen economy, and who's going to make that happen, and who's going to thrive in that economy, and what are the different facets of that? Because you're going to need oxygen to live, to survive, and for propulsion, for your for actually getting and managing around space, right? So a lot of things to consider.
Sure. Uh, I mean, that opens up a whole kettle of what's the word I'm looking for? It's like, when you throw potatoes that are still with water, and you throw them into a hot pot of oil, you just know there's going to be the sparks and the things flying out there.
Yeah.
Where would you like to be in the next 5 years?
So the next 5 years, my plan is I am now pursuing another master's. Uh, and so I'm going to be completing that. I will still be living globally. I'm based out of Miami, actually, but I've been spending a lot of time in Berlin. Um, I would still like to be finalizing my commercial training. I see myself between Europe and the States. I don't know that in the next 5 years there will be a viable flight opportunity, but I think in the fifth year, in either 24 or 25, I believe that will be the year there will be suborbit opportunities for me. And I hope that in that year, I'm a candidate or selected candidate to go up into suborbit at least, which is what I applied for this year. So all of my work the next 4 years leading to that is going to be to have at least more of my education completed, and then my training to be really focused.
Whew. I mean, there's a lot going on here.
So,
There really
much,
is.
yeah. Yeah. And this is the thing, is that I transitioned out of 20 years of doing something else, and I had my education and my experience, and that holds a lot because it contributes to a lot of like how I see um, the human element, right, in all of this. The scientific element, the engineering element, those are things that I'm catching up with. Now, I find myself crunching in the next 4 or 5 years because, in many ways, I am an older candidate. I'm in my 40s, and I feel like I'm catching up with a lot of others, me personally. This might not be the case for many people. Many people are right on track and are probably completely ready to go this year. And I learn from them. I get inspired from them. I work with a lot of those people. So I'm prepping myself and preparing myself. My timeline was that in the next 5 years, I have my pilot's license, I have my language skills down, and that I make myself available with integrity and credibility to be commercially viable for companies that are going up.
That is actually quite exciting. I mean,
It is.
we've got people like astronaut Abby and a whole generation. They call the Mars generation, of these young people who, if they want to become the astronauts that fly to Mars, they are literally doing everything in their power to give them the highest probability to be selected as an astronaut candidate. So, how do you feel about this competition?
So I know them, and I know their parents, and I've worked with them. I go to conferences with them. I train with some of them. Where Possum trains anyone from the age of 17 to 55. I mean, you have a large gamut of people, all interested. So there's no discrimination by age, and there's no discrimination by gender or affiliation, and nothing. It's, do you have an interest? Do you have a skill set? And do you have the passion, right? And are you willing to learn? And these people come together. So the Mars generation, I am actually a member and I support them. And I know many of the original team that started it. And I have to say, I'm not in that competition. I'm in a different competition. Their competition is insanely new. It's developing. It's going to take a few years. They have a long lead time for the availability of their flights. So I find that they have branding, they have PR, they have social media, they have so many different aspects that I didn't have when I was their age. that certainly was not something I could even like even fathom at their age, because it didn't exist yet. Uh, Now, for me in my competition, it's about integrity. It's about credibility. About making wise decisions around the reality, and actually of staying, real, and understanding, okay, I have been introduced to so many people. I've been to visit so many organizations, satellite companies, engineering companies. And where is it that I start filtering reality? Is it viable for me to say I'm an astronaut candidate now? Yes, I'm an active scientist astronaut candidate now. Do I have a flight opportunity promised to me? Not yet. Will I have an opportunity in the next 5 years? Yes. So those are the things that are in my realm to understand. And I constantly have to keep checking it, verifying, and questioning that.
Now, of course, being the multifaceted and multi-talented and multitasking person that uh, you are not only involved in the space world, but you happen to be a singer on the side. Can you tell us a little bit about that hobby of yours?
That was gosh, I didn't expect you to ask that. Yeah, 20, just one moment. So to your question, I actually 20 years ago, I studied opera, and I was in vocal performances because I wanted to be an opera singer. So, and then I did an internship at an opera house, and I realized that that's not the kind of career that I was going to end up in, because it was so much work, and there were definitely more talented singers than I. So I decided to do the humanitarian route. But I did decide to keep singing as a hobby, and have been in a band before, singing mostly jazz. And then I do kind of slight recording on the side, not much, but from time to time. And I do a mean karaoke. So.
Apparently, yeah, I can clear a room in under 5 minutes.
So
it's one
vocal
of those
performance
things.
has always been something I've been really excited to do. It's my fun, passionate hobby on the side, but I haven't performed in a very long time.
Wow. So you are do you think you might be performing in space at some point?
Oh, I would love that.
Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, now with social media, Chris Hadfield got a lot of attention when he did the David Bowie song. So you never know, anything's possible.
Hey, I've seen there's saxophone. There's been a lot of instruments in space. I love it.
And if you definitely like jazz standards, then Fly Me to the Moon would be a fascinating jazz piece if you were going to sing that while settling on the moon. So now we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left, and hopefully they haven't confiscated your phone or anything like that.
I had no idea. I feel so terrible.
No, don't worry about it. What advice would you give young people? Because I mean, you've made it very clear that you've changed your career quite late in life. I mean, you in your late 20s ish. So I mean, when you've made that kind of change, what would you advise young people if they now had a choice to begin somewhere? What sort of advice would you give them?
So the first thing that I think is very important is to never stop questioning. Um, if you stop questioning, then you stop dreaming. And if you think there's something that you want to do, and you feel your body feels excited when you think about something, then you have every opportunity to pursue that. And you can question those things, and you can find ways to be involved in those things. It can be singing, it can be music, it can be art, it can be engineering. Uh, but that there's very little weight on what other people say. It's on what you believe you can do.
Mhm.
I had, a lot of my colleagues who were told that they were girls, so they couldn't be in STEM, and they shouldn't be engineers. That's a boy thing to do. And they decided, nope, it's what I want to do. And they are successful engineers. A lot of women who were told, and young men too, who were told, nope, that's not for you. You should be XYZ. You have to know who you are. And if you have that inner voice that tells you, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be an engineer. That voice is there to guide you, and I don't believe that anyone should silence that voice. Certainly not educators, certainly not parents. And I hope that people find someone in their life to listen to that voice with them.
Wow, that was incredibly inspirational. So Yvette, I would like to say Dankeschön, because you are obviously in Berlin. And we want to thank you so much for making the time to connect with us. We had Tony there in the US, and Rihanna, I think, is somewhere. Rihanna, where are you? Are you in India? Are you in Asia? Where, are you in Malaysia? Where are you? Hopefully she's going to...
I don't think she's off mute, yeah.
No, she was off mute a while ago, but she's not off mute now. And maybe she can just type it in the text there. But yeah, so, and also we had our people watching the live stream. We had quite a few teachers. Tony, you wanted to ask something?
No, I just wanted to say I'm from Colorado, and the Possum Project is out of Boulder. So I've already emailed some of my teachers to see if we can do some connecting with them up there.
Yes.
We have our physics teacher is going to be doing some astronomy class next year. So it could be a great connection for her.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. And actually,
Definitely.
if you reach out on our website, there's an email for Possum 13.
Yeah, I can send them that link to that page that explained the Project 13 stuff. So hopefully,
and I see all those emails. So that's actually, me and another team member are behind that. So.
Great.
Oh,
well,
good. I was going to say, are they allowed to name drop? But they don't have to if it's going straight to you.
They can name drop.
My name, they're normally dropping it and then standing on it and then wiping their feet over
no,
it.
I don't think so.
Not true at all, Steve. Not true at all. You're amazing.
Yeah.
You're almost as amazing as Yvette.
Yeah, I'm really
I'm
grateful to be. I'm telling you, Steve, I'm grateful to be plugged into this community. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You're absolutely welcome. And thank you, Tony and Rihanna, and all the people that streamed it live. And for the people who are going to watch it that couldn't actually watch it live now, they will be watching it at a later stage. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope you get a little bit more sunshine. And
thank you.
We'll be in touch, and we'll be following you very closely. And hopefully we will get to hear about your suborbital flights and your moon base. And I get dibs on the first interview live from the moon when you are there in your hotel.
You're the first fast, so done.
Deal. Okay. I've got witnesses everywhere. All right. Thank you so much. I'm just going to stop the broadcast over here.